Jason Bradley, the Senior Systems Administrator at Vanderbilt University Law School. Chris Bransford, Systems Administrator that helped with the Bluesocket implementation that we're going to review with you today.
Can you talk a little louder?
Yeah, sure can. And the Southern accent is free. There's no extra charge for that. How many of you now currently, one thing I want to avoid today is getting into a debate over whether wireless should be allowed or should not be allowed for the students. Since we all, the majority of us are in the IT department, of course it is our responsibility to facilitate what is handed down to us to be done by the administration. How many of you, just by a show of hands, how many of you currently do not allow wireless in the classroom by one means or another? How many of you want to do that or need to do that? Okay. Well, this is the common dilemma that we faced at Vanderbilt. Obviously, the faculty didn't want the students web surf, check their email, most importantly, probably instant message each other answers, for example. The students did want to be able to get in. First thing that we tried was installing the antennas and using various things, patch antennas, directionals. That was spotty at best. If anybody currently trying that and it's not working out the way you'd hoped, or you found that you have to restrict access where you do want it in order to avoid at all costs the classrooms. The other thing that we wanted, a few faculty did voice the concern that because we had to do that, it did restrict them from being able to use Westlaw, Lexis, and other related resources in their class because the wireless wasn't available when we were using the method of trying to aim antennas. And obviously the biggest part for us was that we had to battle both people. We had the students saying we want it, the faculty saying we don't. Some faculty saying we do want it, so then we realized you can't make everybody happy all the time, so why not give the responsibility away to somebody else where it wasn't our decision anymore. Just for an overview, we implemented a Bluesocket, our brand name, Bluesocket Wireless Gateway. We had to do this obviously at the user level because we needed to be able to control based on who's in the class, not just based on the classroom itself. Finally, we had to meet all the objectives that the administration passed down to us. Those objectives were that we had to default that wireless was blocked all the time. In other words, make it the faculty's option to enable wireless. We wanted to be able to give the faculty the ability to choose either for individual classes, all of their classes, here and there, even in the middle of a class. The solution had to adapt to the changing class times. Sometimes professors may cancel classes and makeups came later, and we needed those to be able to fall under the same umbrella as the original design. And also, probably the most important to us was because we don't have a managed laptop program, we wanted to be able to implement a solution that required minimal impact on the end user. In other words, little to no setup on the student laptop. Currently, campus uses Cisco AeroNet products, as I suspect most people do, but you never know when things may change, so we had to be sure that we were vendor neutral and that would work with any access point regardless of brand. It also had to support the campus Active Directory system that we were going to use for the filtering to determine who was in class, who's not, so that we could use our existing security groups without having to duplicate effort in maintaining those. We also had to be able to allow visitors and guests. One of the biggest problems, the original campus design was that we would have a wireless network that did not broadcast the SSID. So essentially, any visitors and guests that we had to provide that information to them or show them how to configure their laptop with that unique ID. And finally, we had to provide security equal to or greater than the original design, which wasn't much. So we're going to need some information to be able to do this. The first thing that we were going to need is the actual class list. Who teaches the class, when the class is offered, who's in the class, and that information had to be up to date. So campus uses a system they call OASIS, or the Online Academic Student Information System. And what we receive is essentially a comma save file every day at 6 a.m. of who's in every class that we then load into a SQL database using a script. We also had to know the class meeting times, and we use room scheduling software, formerly called CEO Soft, it's now called Meeting Maker, to schedule the individual classes. And those are linked in that same database between which class is scheduled at what time so that the two databases can be linked together. And this is where the Bluesocket came into view. We did check with several vendors, but we ended up using the Bluesocket mainly because of the functionality that it provided and allowed us the room to grow. And I'll go over some of that functionality that we found. There are several different models that they chose for this implementation I'm going to go over today. We used the 2100 model. It was good for roughly 10,000 users. We knew we had nowhere near that, but the next smallest model was around 500 users. And we knew we would eventually break that limit, and that campus may want to use this product elsewhere. We were the pilot program for the entire Vanderbilt campus that is eventually migrating in this direction. Just to give you an overview of how the network looks. At the top left corner here, we have all of our access points in their own unique VLAN so that they can only speak to each other. That's passed through to the router, and then the router passes over to the Bluesocket without having a direct path to the internet. So essentially, one interface on the Bluesocket is on the same VLAN as all of the access points themselves, so that all traffic must pass through that Bluesocket to get out to the internet. Now, the Bluesocket would need a little bit of logic to go on to be able to do this. What I'm going to go through is the step-by-step process that the user sees as well as the back-end process. So initially, the user, once they connect to the access points using a broadcasted SSID, regardless of any website they try to go to, they're instantly redirected to a login page. Most of you have been in a hotel now or an airport, somewhere along those lines that you've seen this done. Once they authenticate with their username and password, the Bluesocket then goes to Active Directory and says, let me see what all this, every group that this user is a member of. It checks to see if the credentials are valid, and if not, they obviously would try again up to 10 times before they have a 3-minute wait to try again to avoid anybody trying to do a brute force attack. If they are validated, then all of the LDAP properties from Active Directory are returned to the Bluesocket. What the Bluesocket then does is check the member of property, so it shows them every Active Directory group that that user is a member of. We have a group called Restricted Wireless Users that we update every minute. And the membership of this list is checked, of this group. So obviously if the user is a member, we basically sign them back out instantly. And if the user is not a member of the group, they have access and we allow them through. And what I'll go through is the roles on Bluesocket, and you'll see here that we assign them a Vanderbilt University user role that defines what they're allowed to do and what they're not. The unregistered role is only allowed to get to the login screen. This initial thought, we thought this would work just fine, but then we ran into a few issues. First of all, on a Bluesocket, once you sign in and your credentials are checked, until you log off, they are not checked again. So we ran into the issue of how do you get evaluated again, or how do we go back and check to see if you got in, if you're already on there. We had to be able to update the membership of this group in Active Directory to near real time, as close as possible. So to fix the first issue, the user signs in at 9:03. The class starts at 9:10. So now it's 2 minutes into class, the user signed in, and since they're not reevaluated, how are you going to handle this? And the way you do this is that Bluesocket provides an API so that your third-party or custom in-house software can interact with standard HTTP post commands to tell the Bluesocket what to do. So essentially, our program that we have written with a third-party developer goes through, and every 2 minutes, it goes through and asks the Bluesocket who all is signed in right now. The Bluesocket then returns a list of users to this software that goes through the list one at a time to see if they're now in a member of this group. If they are a member of the group, we send another command to the Bluesocket to log the user off. If they're not a member, we move on to the next person. Now, because they're now a member of this group, if we do kick them off and they try to sign back in, they're not going to pass the original step because they're now a member of the group. The second issue is that we need to update the group membership in Active Directory at least every minute, because we need to know who's in class right now. So the way we do this is we compile a list of all the classes that as of this minute are in session, and a list of all the students that are in those classes based on the campus data feed that we receive of the course enrollment. We then go through that list and compile all the students, and then remove anybody who hasn't been allowed to use wireless in their class based on the instructor's decision. Again, this says every 2 minutes. We've actually moved this up to every minute. It takes about 10 seconds to parse through all the students in class. We have active membership of roughly 600 students. And again, less than 10 seconds to parse through the list. It actually could be much faster if necessary. So just to give a graphical representation of what this is, Oasis at the top left corner, again, is our campus database that shows who's in which classes, the actual enrollment. Our CEO software where we schedule all of our classrooms and which class is taught in each room. Both of those are aggregated to our central ClassNET database, which is SQL-based. There's an HTML web page that the faculty have access to and their support staff to make the decisions on who's allowed to access this wireless and who's not. And then represented by the yellow sheet of paper here is the actual program, the API interface between the Bluesocket and the database. What actually has the logic built in to determine who should be kicked off if they've already signed in, who should be blocked. It's also the software that updates that Active Directory database, or Active Directory group membership, excuse me. There's some issues raised with security. If you allow anybody in, you don't know what they're doing. Part of what campus did have before the Bluesocket was in place is the ability to monitor that network traffic and determine if a specific number of connections were reached in less than 10 seconds, they must be flooding the network of some sort, perhaps a virus, a Trojan, somewhere along those lines. And the MAC address was stopped at the router to disallow their access until the machine was cleaned up. The one thing that we had to do when we implemented the Bluesocket, since they would lose, since campus themselves would lose router level control of the MAC address, is we had to have the Bluesocket do the same thing. With the latest software on the Bluesocket, it actually has intrusion detection built in now. So just to explain how this works, to help protect your bandwidth on your wireless network, since it is shared among your users, at least on a per channel basis, the Bluesocket watches the number of connections within a 10-second window. If the user opens more than 200 connections in 10 seconds, which is a rarity, then they receive a mark or a strike against their user record on the Bluesocket. If this happens 5 times in a row, so 50 seconds maximum, once that period is reached, the MAC address is blocked at the Bluesocket and no traffic can pass. It also has, you would say, well, what if it was a spur-of-the-moment thing? What if they did have a legitimate need for that many connections, but they didn't repeat it? After 10 seconds pass where they don't reach that period, their mark counter, their strikes are reset back to 0. Once you do hit that limit, the user is sent to a website that informs them of why they've been blocked, who to seek for help, and how they'll get that access back once they've seen someone. And as of now, the Bluesocket's been in place for 11 months, and we've had 0 false positives with the IDS system that's integrated into the hardware. Remember, one of the other requirements was that visitors and guests to the school needed to be able to access the wireless network. And originally, we had to go to each computer if they weren't handy enough for the computer to set up the SSID themselves because it wasn't broadcasted. Now that it was, they're going to see that, but then they're going to get the login screen and not going to know how to go past that point. So the Bluesocket allows local users to be created on the hardware device itself. Once you create the user, you can specify what time they're allowed, how much bandwidth are they allowed, and at what point do you want me to log the user off and delete this login so it's no longer valid. So in advance of a conference, what we did was specify that we would prefer 24 hours notice. Obviously, 24 minutes would be great in some cases. When a conference is being held, we create the local user. The conference ends the next day at 8 o'clock. So at maybe 9 o'clock the next day, we have the users automatically logged out. The login is deleted. There's no cleanup necessary. So what does the user see? What does the faculty member see? This is the user experience. This is the login screen that they're redirected to. It's completely customizable to look however you want to fit the color, shape, templates that you're used to using for your website. What we did here was include a small disclaimer, letting people know that if you are with a conference or guest, this is how you get access. If you're having trouble, here's a phone number you can call to get the tech team. There's also in blue here a privacy statement. Some of the students were concerned that because before they didn't have to authenticate, and now that they do, that their individual accesses and the websites and their email and such is being actively monitored. So one thing to help put their mind at ease is that a disclaimer was added here to let them know that essentially we don't monitor on an individual basis. We may watch total bandwidth. There are some security restrictions like we showed earlier with the intrusion detection. But there's nothing that is individually trackable that we actually perform on a routine basis with no advanced knowledge. So on the left side, you'll see the authentication window. It shows VUNet ID and e-password. These are Vanderbilt's terms for their login name and their password. And again, those fields are customizable as well. There's also a drop-down box there we've found handy for LLM students particularly, where there are nearly a dozen languages built into the device to have it. And once they make the change, a cookie is saved so that they're always returned to the same language at the login screen. You can also have different login screens based on what subnet the user's coming from. One Bluesocket can manage several schools, several departments, so you can have an individual login screen for each department. So you're not locked in once you get one in place. Now for the faculty and staff, they have to be able to control this access, obviously. So on the intranet that we have for all the faculty and staff, at the top they have a link, you'll see at the top right, for ClassNET. That basically takes them to a real-time page that shows all of the classes that are being taught in that current semester. There's also a checkbox where they can show only the classes for today if this is a last-minute change. They would simply click on the title of their class, and they're taken to a screen that shows, based on that CEO scheduler data, when each of those class meetings is scheduled. And you'll see here that they simply check the boxes to allow particular sessions, or they can click Select All to allow all, or Clear All to deny all access. And again, because this is done, because our program runs every single minute, going to the web page, making a change, even from the podium in the middle of class, would take no more than 60 seconds to take effect. So what's to prevent one faculty member from changing another faculty member's classes? And the truth of the matter is, or a staff member, for example, for instance, at Vanderbilt, one support staff may help 6 or 7 faculty. So they need access to all those classes. They may be out, somebody else needs to do that. So the way we went around this was to allow all faculty and staff access to all the classes. And as a check, just in case they do this, is once a change is made, an email is sent both to the person that made the change as well as the teaching faculty member or members for that class, so that they're aware of the situation. If somebody else made the change, if it was in error, they can contact them or go fix it immediately to make sure that it doesn't take effect. And that way, once you get the email confirmation is sent after a successful write to the database. So once the email is sent, you receive essentially a confirmation that your change has indeed been put into place. I know that was kind of brief. What we allowed for was, we know there's going to be several questions here, or at least I hope there are. And we wanted to allow time to answer any questions about the technical or user experience. Again, we want to try to avoid a debate on whether it's allowed or not. Yes, sir.
Did you mention that you're able to turn on and off access to individual students, not just the class, but the students in that class?
It's based on the class membership, so it does affect all the members of the particular class session. And it blocks the individual users, but you don't have individual user control. So if there's 100 students in the class, you cannot block only 20 of them with our implementation. Now, you certainly could with modified code for the software based on other membership. You know, if you had certain students that you never wanted to have access.
The custom written script that you said looks for HTTP, you say HTTP posts?
It issues commands to the Bluesocket using the post command.
Issues commands using the post command. Oh, it issues. How do you listen? Let's say a student logs in at 8:57 and 9:10 are in class. What does Bluesocket do to listen to like a web request from that student and know to cut them off?
Well, actually, they're cut off because they're logged out in advance of that. Every minute when that script runs, it's going to pull the Bluesocket and say who's in this class. And then based on the membership of that class, that username is going to match what's in Active Directory.
So the custom script was written to issue logouts.
Exactly.
Using the HTTP.
Exactly. It's twofold. The first part is to retrieve who's, because the Bluesocket, you have to log a user off the Bluesocket, you have to have their IP address. So what we have to do is pull for the user, get the IP that matches the user, then issue a second command back.
So that means that if the student is not going to class his first student class bans, that the student still can't pick up the wireless.
That is correct.
Okay, I want to make sure.
The workaround for that, as of now, is that we told them they either go to the computer, you know,
So you have to go to the computer center, yes.
exactly, or use a wired Ethernet cable in a wired port in the library, for example. Some students during on-campus interviews, or you know, they may have an interview scheduled, they want to skip class for that day.
I think it's dreadful that you've done such a good job of implementing something like this. Now we're all probably going to have to do it. It solves the problem we're all kind of facing. First question is, what's kind of the development time to gin up the scripts needed to compile hardware?
The hardware took 2 weeks to be delivered. With 1 day set up on the hardware, and the custom program we used, our external developer, it was 8 hours time, including debugging time.
What about keeping everything running? What kind of a staff allocation do we need?
Since we've implemented this, other than about the only time the IT staff are concerned now is when a faculty member cancels a class and doesn't go turn on their access or have their support staff do that. The students call us and say, my class has been canceled, can you turn it back on? So we go to this web page, check the box, and so that 30 seconds is about the limit of support that we have to do on the Bluesocket. It has not crashed, it has not frozen, and again, that's 11 months in service. Yes, in the back.
Well, in response to his question, I actually answered because I'm in your team.
I knew you would be here somewhere.
But are you using Schedule Plus? When you say CEO Schedule, are you
Yes.
using, I guess you guys moved to the web-based version, not the older client-based version?
We actually are still using both.
Oh, you're using both. Okay.
Right.
Are they? Do you have some that use the client and some that use the web-based?
Right. Our building and event scheduler, our events coordinator for the entire school, they use the client still. Everybody else is using the web-based version because the majority of those web-based are just for queries. For actually entering the data, everything routes through one person or a two-person team.
What version of the OS and Bluesocket do you guys go to? Have you had any problem with like the Apache service on there? Because I have the same device. Sometimes when you have a lot of responses going to that web page, if it's been up for a period of time, you just restart your web service. Have you experienced that at all?
No, we haven't. Let me just check and let you know. I believe it's 4.1. Yeah. So particularly 4.1.0.11. Yes.
Once the student authenticates, can they print?
Yes. The rule set that we have in place is that once you authenticate, you're allowed unrestricted access regardless of what port you need to access on, unless we know it's a particular port that is only used by a particular Trojan or virus.
So, I mean, once you have access to the Bluesocket, you can do pretty much everything you can do if you are plugged to a wired port in a library.
Exactly. Yes.
You mentioned the member of attribute. Is that, what schema is that in LDAP? I mean, is this LDAP that comes out of Active Directory?
Yes, it's a secure
part of
LDAP
Microsoft
connection
schema.
to a domain controller.
So it's part of a Microsoft schema.
Exactly.
Have you seen any problems with students like in the room next door doing internet connection sharing?
No.
It would be possible though, wouldn't it?
It would be feasible. One thing that we ran into, honestly, is that students, once they figured this out, as they are very keen about doing, is they said, well, I'm not in class during that time. Here's my login. Let me have yours. So how do you get around that? The Bluesocket can limit the number of active connections per username. So we allow a maximum of 1 connection per user. So if I give you my password and you sign in, I only hurt myself by doing that. Because now I can't get in because you've already authenticated it yourself. It's not going to do you any good to switch to your own user because you're blocked.
Most times you have policies anyway for the fact giving out their account information.
Yes, yes. In the back?
I'm thinking along those lines, could you actually match up MAC addresses with the user?
No, we sure do not. The DHCP address is at least at 1 hour, and as far as the IP address to the user, the MAC address is only used when we have to block on the IDS system. If the intrusion detection blocks a user and they were logged in at the time, so it knew who they were, then it will retain that username, so you'll know who they were. But it will also block. The IDS system will also block users who are attempting to send traffic even if they're unauthenticated. That wouldn't pass through anyway because of the rule set, but it still catches their attempt and goes ahead and blocks that MAC address. Yes.
How many, do you have classes in Active Directory? Do you have groups in there for every class, or is it just one base group?
Just there's just that one large group restricted wireless users.
Populated?
Exactly.
Back and forth, okay.
Exactly. When the script runs, its process is to issue a command to clear out the membership of the group and then repopulate, even if the same username is going back in there.
Actually, 2 questions. Do you have login scripts? I mean, so users can map to their home drives or a shared. I mean, is this a concern for you?
With the students, no, because we don't. We provide network storage for them, but it's web-based.
Oh, it's web-based. Okay.
So from the student perspective, no. Now, from our faculty and staff laptops that also pass to the Bluesocket, one of the advantages I haven't mentioned here is that the Bluesocket has what's called transparent NTLM authentication. So my computer's joined to the domain. When it boots, my computer's going to send a DNS query to look for a domain controller to authenticate itself. The Bluesocket sees that traffic pass through, and it's been programmed to allow that traffic by default from the factory. So it sees it going through, and it marks that in the list as domain controller or domain computer booting. And it watches the credentials. If your credentials go through, of course they're encrypted. If the packet that comes back in NTLM says, yes, you are authenticated, the Bluesocket automatically will log you in with no interaction whatsoever.
So at your school, the students just have web-based access, don't have login access.
That's correct. If they did have a login script, once they, essentially what we would have to do with the unregistered role is that you can specify certain traffic that can pass in an unauthenticated state. So DNS traffic, for example.
The other question is, do you have any encryption on the wireless side?
No, we do not at this time. And that's the good thing about the Bluesocket implementation here, is that because we basically have our own control of the Bluesocket, even though it's housed in a network closet at campus, they can still maintain all the AP infrastructure, and it will operate completely independently of those APs. Yes, sir.
Our exam software, upon completion of the exam, SFTPs the results before you would have a chance to bring up the browser. I think you may have just answered this. It would allow you to
Exactly.
set an SFTP traffic.
I'll show you here. This is a live connection to the Bluesocket. Actually, what you have here are various roles and role elements. What I'm going to show you is a role here, and there is an unregistered role. And what this unregistered role has here is a list of stuff that's allowed to pass in an unauthenticated state. And you see the second item is exam traffic. For us, it's HTTP, but you'd be able to specify, port 2122, for example, and say that this traffic can pass through, and you can specify a particular destination, a time frame, etc. So you could say that this traffic for exam is allowed to pass without logging in. Yes?
Vanderbilt in an urban setting.
Well, actually, downtown Nashville.
So is there cellular companies that offer internet service in your area?
Yes, there are.
Is interest in it gone up amongst your students?
It will. But, that's part of this is that it buys us some time in helping the faculty understand that there is going to be a point where we can't do anything about it. Unless you say lid's closed, you can't use a laptop, and I just don't foresee that happening. This just buys us some time. Yes, ma'am.
And the judge disallows access to the students, and disallows access to the number of cells as well.
Yeah, actually, based on their username is never blocked. So the faculty
Okay,
member.
so they're allowed simultaneous allowed them all.
Exactly. Exactly.
How much it costs you to implement this one?
Good question. The model that we chose, which is, I haven't looked recently, but was the middle model that Bluesocket offered. The device was just under $13,000. Programming cost was $800 for 8 hours work. And we had some small port charges for gigabit connections to the campus network, which they charged us $300 apiece for.
Have you ever thought of collecting MAC addresses so that if you want to have a granular control of each laptop, you can, because you said this would stop at a MAC address level.
Right, it could, if you wanted to go with the MAC address level. The issue there is that you have to keep track of which student has which MAC address. That's not to keep you from, if I do have a PCM card from handing it to another student, if it dies and I have to go to the store and return it, now I have to register another one, and I have that old one still in the database that I have to clean out later. So it's a bit more housekeeping required to go that route. Yes.
Have you run into any problems where students have trouble with their wireless? So at some point they give up and plug in wired, but because they're logged in, they're denied wired access?
Actually, the classrooms, we only have one that is wired. And as of this semester, it will be behind Bluesocket control as well, even on a wired connection. The Bluesocket does have, essentially, in this model, can manage up to 200 subnets as well. So the one wired classroom is a separate subnet that it has full control of. Yes?
How many do you control the VLANs that are out there for your access points where they're plugged into?
Actually, campus does that for us.
Do you just use one VLAN for your wireless, or do you sort of have it broken up like, this is the bit for VLANs,
All the entire wireless is in a single VLAN. And again, it's trunked back through the router, but only to the Bluesocket. There's no direct route without passing through there. So essentially, we've turned the router's port into a switch port.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Kent will be very happy when you have that running. Yes, sir.
Are your classrooms close to student organization offices in proximity?
Not now. They're not. They
I'm
were.
curious whether you'll ever have any student organizations attempt to put up their own access points.
If they did, they would be picked up. The campus uses rogue AP detection, and they get picked up. And so far, we had one student that this was nearly, I guess, almost 10 months ago, right after the Bluesocket was implemented. Brought a Linksys from home in a backpack, set it out in the lobby, plugged in, and they were picked up by the end of the class. Any other questions?
Last question. Has any of the students complained that I need my traffic encrypted? I don't want people to see the website I go to.
No, they.
Because You can. I mean, you can. I mean, there are so many available tools out there. You can plug, and you can see whatever everybody is doing.
Certainly could. The biggest, nobody has come to us and said that. The campus argument right now is that all email traffic for campus is encrypted. And the majority of your websites that you may go to, unless you really care every website that you're going to, anything that's that important, banking, for example, is going to be SSL encrypted as it is. And again, for it, because there's the web link here, you can see Bluesocket did a press release as well as basically a success story on this implementation. And feel free to look that up on the website here. And if you have any further questions, feel free to contact one of us.